We're going to get started. This is Brian Washburn. He's the co-inventor of Soapbox. We're in for a treat tonight because I don't know how many of you have seen him in action. He's a wonderful speaker. He actually makes me really calm whenever he speaks. It's one of those things where whenever I hear Brian speak, I just kind of go, I take a deep breath, which is really cool. But he's going to talk to us about the magical world of presentation design. And I know he's going to be using the chat window. I know he's going to be using breakout rooms, so be ready to get active tonight. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Brian to take over.
Thank you, Darren. I'm going to share my screen here in just a second. Let me throw this up here. Get ready. All right. I think I'm ready here. Let me just check a couple more things, make sure I have the chat open so I can see what people are saying, all the nice things they're saying about me and how my voice is calming. All right. Well, thank you everyone for investing some time this evening to join me and talk about the magical world of virtual presentation. I'm Brian Washburn, and as Darren mentioned, I'm the co-inventor of something called Soapbox. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And we'll also, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit more briefly about who I am. So I run a company called Endurance Learning, and we do a number of different things. We create all sorts of training programs for organizations, both in person and online. We do some retreat facilitation, things like that. So if you're ever looking for an extra set of hands when it comes to developing training programs, let me know, give me a call, and we'll see what we can do to work together. But beyond that, I want to talk about this world of magical, the magical world of presentation design. And I am kind of really nerdy when it comes to magic. So this winter at ATD Technology, they had a speaker, the keynote speaker was there and doing illusions and magic, and I ate it all up. I've always been a big fan of magic, and I think that the world of presentation design really can involve and learn some things that magicians do to make our work kind of a little bit more easy and also give it a little bit of that wow factor. And so I'm going to talk about that here. But before I go too far into that, I'd love to know from you, and we're going to put up a poll question here, when it comes to designing presentations right now, how much time do you spend on developing an hour of training? So if you think of putting, kind of the initial brainstorming, to putting the outline together, to putting your materials together, to having something ready to go, how much time does that take to develop each hour of training that you have?
All right, we have a question from Bruce. He's asking, is it ILT or e-learning?
Well, let's go ILT. It's a good question. E-learning can take 80 hours to develop that 1 hour training. All right, so it looks like people are saying there's kind of a wide variety of responses that we're getting. Some people do it pretty quickly. Other people say it could take more than 8 hours. And that's one of those things, when I had a chance to go and see some magical shows, it's always fascinating to see what they're able to do right before our very eyes, and I wonder how long it takes them to put things like that together. Now, with the world of learning development, what we can do is kind of learn from the magicians, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in just a second. I'm going to get this poll off my screen, and at the very end of this presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about what we think is kind of a magical tool called Soapbox that can help people put together things really fast and give it a little bit of that wow factor just in terms of how fast it can be put together. So you enter a little bit of information, you choose some learning objectives, and then it will basically spit out a sequence and flow of activities that you can use, and it will do this all in about 15 minutes worth of tinkering. It'll generate some slides for you and a facilitator guide as well. But stay tuned for that. We'll talk more about that. But I want to go back to this idea of magic. And I had a chance to go to a conference in Vegas several years ago, and outside of the conference, I had a chance to see Penn and Teller, and it was one of the coolest shows I'd ever seen. It's big name magicians. But they're having fun up there. They captured the imagination of the audience, and all throughout the session, Penn Jillette sat there and he narrated the actual and would kind of taunt the audience. He said, you know, we don't have these wizardry powers. It's all illusion and sleight of hand and misdirection. And he would taunt us to see if we could figure it out. We could never figure it out. But one of the things that he also said, and that he's quoted as saying, is that when it comes to the secret of magic, the only secret of magic is that I'm willing to work harder on it than you think it's worth. And I think that that's a lot of times what can make the difference between a really killer presentation that we can deliver, a really killer learning experience, and something that people are like, nah. And one of the things is we need to not just work hard about it, but I think we also need to work smart about it. And so one of the questions that I have for you here, oh, actually, before I get into the question, some of the other things that made the magic show, that makes any magic show really interesting, is that there's an element of performance on the stage, and I think that's the role of us as facilitators or presenters. But there's also something that makes really good magic shows is audience participation and getting the audience involved. And that every night it can be something, they'll do the same trick, but every night it can be something different, because you get to see different people respond, or maybe their plants in the audience. But I think that one of the other keys in transferable elements from a magic show into what we do is making sure that the audience is involved. But one of the biggest things, I think, is having tricks or tools of the trade. You know, when it comes to when it comes to what it is that we do, we can, you know, animate things on the screen. We can use different videos. We can use other things that people have developed to make our jobs easier. We can draw on the screen, stuff like that. But I'm kind of curious from where you sit, what are some, and let's use the chat box here, what are some of the tools of the trade that we have up our sleeves that can make our jobs easier as trainers? Go ahead and put that into the chat box. So polls for engagement, and if you're in person, there are definitely some different things that we can put up there. So we can use poll everywhere. If we're doing a virtual session, and a lot of us are doing virtual sessions right now, just using polls can make things just more engaging, and it's a little bit more fun. Yellow stickies, or if we're doing virtual, we can do drawing on the screen. So some of these different technologies are definitely things that can make our jobs easier. The planning, people are saying planning mixed participants in class sessions. There's definitely a lot of different strategies. When I think of some of the tools that make our jobs easier, now before I asked, you know, how long does it take to create an hour of learning? Somebody said, is that for instructor-led or is that for e-learning? If you're thinking of e-learning, one of the tools that can make our job, that's a game changer, has been Storyline or Captivate. We no longer have to code things or go to developers necessarily in order to create e-learning, and magically we have this thing called Storyline or Captivate or whatever other rapid authoring tool we have. I know that Betty is here, and there's lots of different augmented reality tools that can make that can put that into our own fingertips and create things like that. When it comes to some of the other things that we have, Google is this magical tool that has all of the knowledge ever, that's right there. But even if you take a look at Google Scholar, we have research that's right at our fingertips. Some job aids, I think, is something else. And so one of the things that I've put up into the chat, or I haven't put it up there, but several people have put it up there, is that there is a handout. And if you actually download that handout, what you'll see, especially for people who are doing virtual training sessions, this could be a handout that can be really helpful. I've just finished doing a series of webinars for folks that are trying to convert from in-person to virtual training. And a lot of people get very anxious about in-person going to virtual training, and one of the reasons is because people just aren't necessarily familiar with some of the different things or the whole range of things you can do in many different situations using a limited set of tools. With virtual, you are a little bit limited in terms of the different kinds of tools that you have available to use. So we can use our audio, we can use the webcam, we can share the screen, we can use chat, we can poll, we can put people in breakout rooms. That's kind of it. There might be one or two other things that you can do, but with virtual, you're kind of limited. That said, if you take a look at that handout, what you can do is you can start to really think through, okay, first of all, what's my learning objective for a session? And now, what are all the different things I could do with that learning objective? Now, it depends on the platform that you have for a virtual session, but when it comes to virtual training, if you're using WebEx or Zoom or Adobe Connect or GoToMeeting, things like that, you do have a lot of those features at your fingertips. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually ask people to start to get to know each other. Darren talked about one of the things about Learnapalooza is you have that chance to create community. As I talked about, one of the cool things about Magician Show is audience participation. So we're going to break you up into breakout rooms in just a few minutes. And I'm going to ask you all to see if you can kind of take this idea of Penn Jillette to heart. You know, what is all the work that we can put into a session? And if we had to develop a virtual training session that looked like this, we're going to do a virtual training session because our company needs to switch databases. And we need to do it right now in the age of coronavirus. So we can't all come together. We can't be in a lab or a computer lab or something like that where we're all kind of looking at the same computers at the same time. So we have to do it virtually. And with this session, what we'd have to do is we have to explain the value of converting to the new database, which the entire company will implement next month. And we also have to demonstrate the ability to accurately input basic customer information into the database. By we, I mean participants. Participants need to be able to do that. We need to see that they can do that. So we're going to put you into breakout rooms, something that's going to help you with this, because there's going to be several things that I'm going to want you to do. So there is a link here to a Google Doc, and I'll also put it up in the chat box here. It will be the link that you see on screen is a tiny URL. The one that I put in the chat is the full link. But when you break out into your breakout rooms, I'm going to ask you to do three things. When you think of these learning objectives, I want you to think, okay, what virtual tools could you use in order to accomplish each of these objectives? Maybe there's more than one tool that you could use. So this is a brainstorming exercise. When you think of that, and if you think, okay, I could use polling for this, for example, what exactly would you use with polling? So expand upon that a little bit more, and you can do that in this Google Doc. And then the third question that I have for you is, how would you rank the different activities that you brainstormed in terms of how comfortable you are? 1 being the most comfortable, 2 being something you're a little less comfortable, things like that. So you have this Google Doc. You're going to be asked to work in small groups. And when you're put in breakout rooms, it'll say you're in breakout room 1 or breakout room 2. Find the sheet in the Google Doc that takes you to breakout room 1, breakout room 2, whatever. And that will be your group's sheet to fill out, okay? Are people able to get that document? Are they able to access that document? Are people getting a 404?
I just put in the tiny URL in the chat window as well, so maybe people can access this.
Okay, looks like people got it.
Okay.
And the instructions will be on that document as well. I'll be popping into the breakout rooms just to make sure that you can kind of get it. Don't forget that when you get into the breakout room, you'll no longer see what's on the screen in front of you, and you'll need to take yourself off of mute so you can talk to people. But we're going to give you about 10 minutes to work in your breakout rooms and do a little bit of brainstorming. It looks like the tiny URL works, so the one that's up on the screen.
Not for me. Sorry, guys. I've been trying to get off mute for a while. I don't seem to be able to copy and paste that in Zoom.
Do you just want to, have you tried to just type tiny.cc/
Now that I didn't try to do. That's too old school.
Go in by any means necessary. All right. So we're going to see if this works or if it's a complete disaster, because that's also something that magicians face on a day-to-day basis. They're going to try to do something magical, and sometimes it's high stakes. But Darren, I think we're ready to banish people to their to breakout rooms. We'll give them about maybe between 8 and 10 minutes. We'll give you a heads up with a 1-minute warning when we're going to suck you back here.
Okay, and then you'll have 60 seconds. Once Brian calls you back, you'll have 60 seconds to finish up what you're doing in your breakout rooms, and then it'll come back to us.
Yeah, you may also want to use that handout if you're able to get the handout that was emailed to you prior to this, or the link is up above in the chat as well, because that could help you thinking through what kind of activities might you use here. Aaron, where are you joining us from? I'm looking. No, that's a fake background. I was gonna say what's going on back there?
It's a fake background. I live in the Bay Area, but I'm from Detroit, and this is the Heidelberg Project in Detroit.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
I just saw that
Betty would recognize it. Yeah.
I saw that Star Wars has released backgrounds, official movie set backgrounds, so you can have like the bridge of a Star Destroyer and stuff like that too, if you want that. So anyway, I'm digressing right now, and we're going to run out of time if I keep this up. So thank you all for. I was watching on my one monitor what people were actually writing on in the Google Doc, which was really interesting to see, just kind of what and kind of imagine what some of the conversations that you're having were. But going back to this idea of the magical world of presentation design and involving participants, now if you can, it looked like each group was pretty heads down in their conversation, and everybody has access to the same Google Doc, and so you actually can take a peek and see what other people have written as well, if you were kind of curious of how other people are answering. But we have a poll question that Darren's going to put up here, and I'm just kind of curious, was this document helpful at all as you were having your conversations, if you're actually assuming you're able to access it? I'm kind of curious, was this useful, or nah, we didn't really use it, if you had access to it?
I think that having the options presented across the top is very helpful. I think there's too much detail in all the different ways one might utilize them to sort of absorb in the short time frame.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we've kind of sliced and diced this in a number of different ways. We have another worksheet similar to this, where it's simply what platform do you have, and these are the options that you have as well. Thank you, Sandy, for that comment, because with this, and it can be kind of overwhelming, and you can also be taking a look kind of down the left-hand side and thinking, I wouldn't word any of my objectives like that at all. So there can definitely be some different ways to look at this. Some people may find it helpful, some don't. But I want to go back to this idea of some of the most important things that we can pull from magicians is their toolkit and how they have tricks of the trade that as an audience member you don't necessarily see, but it makes their job a lot easier. They have nail files, they have hidden keys, they have things that help them get out of the handcuffs, they have all sorts of different things. They use smoke and mirrors and things like that. We can do that as well. And so I'm just kind of curious when it came to some of these activities that people are most anxious about. And again, we're talking about virtual a lot these days just because this is the environment we're living in. When it comes to virtual, it looked like breakout rooms was something that gave people anxiety. I don't know if every group got into the force ranking, but I'd just love to hear from you all, and you can go ahead and take yourself off of mute. What were some of the things that gave you some anxiety when you thought we could do that? It would make me nervous.
I know for our group, this is Bruce, group 1, we'd put breakout rooms as 5 just because there's always seems to be technical issues. I've even tried breakout rooms internally with our own L&D organization, and invariably something goes wrong.
It always does. In this particular session, Amy, she hung out with Darren and I because we couldn't get her into the breakout room. That said, with the breakout rooms, I absolutely agree that there is almost always some sort of issue with breakout rooms. And that said, I've always found, both as a participant and as a presenter, that's almost always one of the most valuable interactions that we can do virtually. So for folks who are on this, and maybe this was your first time doing a breakout room, I'm kind of curious, how did that feel to you in terms of being sucked out of here, having a small group to converse with, and then come back in a large group? You don't actually have to be, for anybody. How do you like that breakout experience when you're doing a virtual session?
I can comment on that. It's interesting. I've done this a fair bit, and it is a lot smoother and more natural if you already know the people in the room. If you don't, then it's very human to want to first, make some connection or get to know who the people that you're there with.
Yep.
Before you just dive into an exercise.
That's an excellent point. When it comes to the idea of using breakout rooms, now I was just doing a session earlier this week, and people only had 3 minutes, and they didn't know each other, and and the reason we did it was just to give them, expose them to experience of what it felt like to be in a breakout room. With this particular session, we made sure that we allowed ample time. Teresa's saying it always takes longer, and it absolutely does. So we wanted to make sure that we gave a good amount of time, 8 to 10 minutes, so that people could get to know each other, but also have some of these conversations. Now, the last thing that I want to do here, so there's a couple of different pieces that can kind of give us that magical experience, right? So you have Storyline that kind of create stuff and without having to code. You have Google that gives you all the information at your fingertips. There are job aids, and hopefully this is one of those things, especially if you're going to start to convert things to virtual. Job aids like this just kind of give you the full idea, the range of different things. You don't even have to take a look at the left-hand column if you don't want, just to know the different range of things that you can do. And then if you think, okay, what is it that we want people to accomplish? Starting to take a look down that left-hand column, maybe that would be helpful as well. The last thing I'm going to show you here, just real quick, is a tool that we developed with Endurance Learning, and I want to just kind of show you how quickly it would be possible to start to create some presentations if this was something that you wanted to do, if time was something. Now, this particular tool, it's called Soapbox. It's been developed for in-person sessions, and so we're still a couple of months away from it being able to be functional to help develop virtual sessions. But if we wanted to develop a session similar to what you were just doing, and you took about 10 minutes and people were starting to come up with some ideas, but if you wanted to come up with a very detailed plan for a session, this can actually go ahead and cut a ton of time off that. What activities are we going to use, the development type of phase here. So if we were to put together a presentation called the TPS database, and say we had about 60 minutes to put this together, again, eventually sometime we're going to have this available for virtual. We've had users tell us that we can actually use this. It gives us some good guidelines to do something virtually. So we have had people use this for virtual, but if we were to do this, we could actually do this pretty quickly here. Think about if we wanted to kind of mimic a virtual experience, probably the closest that we would get in person setting is setting people up classroom style. And then we select the learning objectives that we'd have. And so the learning objectives for our particular session, we're talking about, we wanted to explain the value. And I really liked what people were coming up with when it came with how they would get people to explain the value. With this, explain the value of the new system and why we'll be using it, right? And then the second objective was to demonstrate the ability to accurately input information. And if you think of learning objectives, those are always going to be participant centered. So some of the things that I was seeing when people were putting their own thoughts in there is that they were going to use screen share to show people exactly how they might do some things. And other people said, we use screen share to have participants show us that they're accurately implementing some things. With Soapbox, I've been talking to you for, I don't know, 5 minutes with this. And what it does is it takes that information and will put it together just in a matter of minutes to give you a sequence and flow of activities that you might be able to use. Again, this has been created for in-person delivery, but if we wanted to do something virtually, we could do some of these activities virtually. Some of these we might need to change and say, you know what, that doesn't really work for a virtual session. So, but you think about how can we start having people share what they think the value could be, or what are some of their concerns. Now, I saw that some people said, oh, maybe we do polling or things like that. But what if you did something as simple as have people put in exactly 6 words, what do you even think the value of this system would be? That could be a way to start it. So one of the things that Soapbox does is it gives you a bunch of different thoughts or ideas that you might not otherwise think of, even if you're going to do it virtually. You could do a case study, but it also in Soapbox, there's a bunch of different activities. So if you just wanted to, lecture at people, you can change up into lecture. And then if you wanted them to be able to explain the value of the new system, maybe you don't have them complete the form, so that's not the right activity here. Let's switch that into a small group discussion. And people said we would have some breakout rooms and things like that as well. So you can spend some time, whether it's 2 to 4 hours or 4 to 8 hours or more than 8 hours, putting together presentations. But when it comes to trying to do things a little bit more quickly and right before your very eyes, this could be a tool that could also be helpful. And it's going to be something that when Learnapalooza comes around, we'll be able to talk a little bit more about. And at that point, it should also have the virtual capabilities as well. So we wanted to show this to you as well as another one of those kind of pull a rabbit out of your hat types of tools that will generate presentations for you, kind of like that. So that is, we spent some time today talking a little bit about, how do we create a magical experience for our participants, but also how do we do some of that work behind the scenes, and what are some of the shortcuts, or what are some of the tools of our trade that we can use. So we've talked about some different technologies. We've talked about job aids, and now we've talked about Soapbox. I'm going to wrap up here just by bringing you back to the slides that I had here and see if there are some additional questions, if people have questions here, or if we wanted to throw it back to Darren and Aaron to wrap this up. If you would like to reach out to me about anything that you've seen here, whether it comes to just ideas, brainstorming, how do we put together presentations faster, my information's here. You can email me, you can reach out to me via Twitter. My Twitter handle's right here. I put a blog twice a week, once on Mondays, which is a podcast, and once on Thursdays, which is in written form. And then if you're interested in Soapbox, the information's there as well. So I'm gonna come up for air. I'm going to see if there are any questions here, or if we wanted to throw it back to Aaron and Darren.
Brian, EJP here. It looks like there's a provocative statement from our friend and colleague Bruce that I think you can handle, magician that you are. How do we work on application? He noted that it was one of the shortest time frames. So.
And Bruce, were you talking about what you saw on in that demo?
Yes, correct. The application portion was 10 minutes, while the top 5 was, I think it was 15 minutes, which was just kind of caught me off guard.
Yep. Nope. So and this is just kind of the way that the system kind of breaks things out. There's a little bit of arbitrariness in terms of the formula itself. But if you were to actually go in and use the system, you can change anything up that you'd like to change up. And so if we wanted to have a small group discussion, especially in a virtual session where we know it's going to be a longer time. Now, for this particular objective, this is about, kind of justifying the use of this system. So maybe 10 minutes is the right amount of time, especially if we have to show people what the system is. But if we wanted to make it a 20-minute conversation, we can go ahead and do that. Now, one of the things that Soapbox does is it'll keep your time limit over here as well. So now we're over by 8 minutes. So actually, you're absolutely right. We don't need to spend all this time right here talking about this new system. So if we kind of gave it a general overview, we could bring it back down to we're running on time. So with this particular system, it's really open to your customizations. The pain point that we were looking to solve here is a couple. One is when you took a look at that first poll that we did here, there's a whole range of amounts of time that people spend on putting together presentations. Some do it in 2 to 4 hours. Some it takes more than a day. So if part of the pain is how long it takes to put together a presentation, Soapbox can help you come up with some of those ideas kind of in a blink of an eye, as opposed to spending the day staring at your screen thinking, I use this activity every single time. I don't know what else I should do, right? And the other thing is it can't guess your content. And so you do need to come in here and customize it a little bit. So in addition to changing up the amount of time, go in here and put in your talking points and things like that. Once you're done with it, then you can wrap it up and it will generate a hard copy facilitator guide for you with step-by-step instructions, both what's in here as well as anything that you've customized. But it's a good question, and I apologize if that was a little bit misleading in terms of how it kind of shook out in terms of how much time you'd put there. I think that that's a good keen eye, and you're absolutely right. The application is where we should be saving our time for.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Anything else? If there are no other questions, I see that Aaron's scouring the chat, but if there are no other questions, or if you have some questions that you wanted to take offline, I'm happy to talk to you about those. Otherwise, I'm going to throw it back to Aaron and Darren to
I have one question for you just while we have you in front of us.
Yep.
For those of us who know you and your work, Brian, you are a very gifted, internationally recognized facilitator, trainer, particularly in the instructor-led in-person environments. So just kind of speaking from your expertise and given that that's your deep expertise, any just kind of general thoughts as you're pivoting and transitioning? I'm sure you've done a lot online too, but just, we're in a weird time right now. Are you seeing or noticing or have any pearls of wisdom for us, just kind of along these lines?
Yeah, I'm right there with you in terms of going and making that shift from in-person to virtual. And we've been doing a lot of sessions just with blog readers in terms of what are you seeing, what are you anxious about? And one of the things that the metaphor that really came to me as I was talking about this, the idea of going from in-person to virtual, even for people who've been in the field for 20 years or more, it creates anxiety. And it reminds me of my favorite movie, Hoosiers. And there's a scene in Hoosiers. If you've never seen the movie, it's about this high school basketball team from a small town in Indiana, and they go all the way to the state championship game. And they walk into the gym, the Butler University Fieldhouse, as they're getting ready for the championship game. And all the players are just overwhelmed as they look around the arena, thinking this is a lot bigger than anything I've ever imagined playing in. And the coach looked them in the face and said, if I don't do something here, they're going to beat themselves before they even get on the court. They're going to be overwhelmed by the moment. And so he asked a couple players to get on each other's shoulders. He asked them to measure from the top of the rim to the bottom of the floor. And he asked, what's the measurement? And they said 10 feet. And he said, well, what's the measurement of the top of the rim to the bottom of the floor in our small gym back in Hickory? And they said 10 feet. And so the point was, as long as we're doing the same things, the fundamentals, For in the movie, it was about basketball, right? The court is the same size. It's the same game that we've been playing our whole lives. It's a bigger arena, yes. It's the same game. For us, when it goes to in-person to virtual, it is the same game as long as we have the same fundamentals, the learning objectives, activities that are connected to the learning objectives, connection to our audience. Those are the same fundamental things we need to keep in mind. Now, how we do that might be a little bit different. Being familiar with the technology, being familiar with the different features that you can use. But beyond that, it really is. It's the same thing whether you're going from in-person to virtual or whatever it might be. So keep that in mind. It can be anxiety producing, which is why I was asking about, where is your level of anxiety with some of those activities? But when you get down to it and come up with a good plan, then the next piece is to practice, because several people here have already mentioned with breakout rooms, it's gonna screw up. Even with something as simple as polling, make sure that you have somebody who is a producer who can kind of take care of some of this stuff, and you've practiced. The first time that we practiced our webinar about how to do virtual trainings, we couldn't get the polls to show up on anybody's screen. And so it's going to be really important to be familiar with what the features are.